I was standing on the stone steps of a royal estate deep inside an English forest rain, whispering through the ancient trees, when the door opened, and a man with red swollen eyes whispered the words that froze me in place. "Hurry, the king is waiting for you." For a second I couldn't breathe. A Marine Corps staff sergeant like me wasn't supposed to be anywhere near royalty. I was trained for logistics, field support, emergency response, not this. Not secret estates, not hidden histories, not men in royal uniforms bowing as if they'd been waiting for me their whole lives. My heartbeat thudded in my ears as the man stepped back and motioned me inside. The hall was warm and dim, filled with portraits whose eyes seemed to follow me. Old faces, old bloodlines, old secrets. My boots echoed against marble floors older than my entire country. But that moment, the shaking breath, the impossible words, the feeling that something long buried was clawing its way back into the light that wasn't where my story truly began. No, my story began long before the king summoned me. Long before the royal driver arrived at the airport holding a sign with my full name. My story began the day I lost everything. I was 6 years old, too young to understand what a tragic accident meant. Too young to understand why adults whispered instead of explaining. Too young to understand how a child could suddenly belong nowhere. The police told me my parents died when their car went off a back road during a storm. There were no bodies, no photos, just a file, a closed case. Children don't question death the way adults do. They accept it because they have to. So I accepted it. The orphanage became my world. A sturdy red brick building just outside Richmond, Virginia. Clean enough, crowded enough, lonely enough. The kind of place built on donations, goodwill, and the quiet ache of too many forgotten birthdays. But I learned to survive there, to blend in, to grow up quiet. And I was lucky, if you can call any orphan lucky. The staff truly cared, especially Mrs. Ardmore, a retired nurse who once told me, "Some children carry old souls, sweetheart, you're one of them." Veterans sometimes volunteered there, two older men with stiff joints, faded tattoos, and stories that smelled like oil and sand. Maybe that's where the seed took root, the idea that service could build a family where bloodline failed. And there was something else, something I never told anyone. Whenever paperwork was filled out, school forms, medical forms, camp registrations, there was always a pause, a moment of hesitation, a flicker of confusion. Once I peeked over a clerk's desk and saw my file open. Some pages were stamped restricted. For a 6-year-old orphan from nowhere, restricted. The clerk shut the folder so fast her fingers trembled. She never let me see it again. But even as a child I felt it. My life had shadows. Shadows no one wanted me to see. When I turned 18, I enlisted in the United States Marine Corps. The decision felt like gravity, simple, inevitable. I was sturdy, disciplined, good at following orders, good at doing hard things without complaint. The military didn't care about your past, only your future. For the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged somewhere. Boot camp scraped me down to bone and rebuilt me as something sharper, stronger. I earned respect the slow way with quiet consistency, with reliability, with grit. I stayed in logistics and field operations work that required clarity and trust, work I was good at. But sometimes, late at night, I'd still pull out the one thing I had left from my childhood. A photograph of my father holding me as a baby. His face wasn't fully visible, half turned away, but his hands were strong, protective. The background was blurry like it had been taken in a rush, and the coat he wore looked military, but not quite American. That bothered me for years. I tried digging once. I asked the county clerk for my parents' files. She typed my name, frowned, squinted at the screen, and said in a shaky voice, "Honey, I'm sorry, I can't open this. It says I don't have clearance." Clearance for an orphan's birth certificate. That was the day I realized the truth. Someone somewhere didn't want me knowing who I was. But military life kept me busy enough not to dwell on it until the night everything changed. I was finishing an equipment audit on base when a runner found me breathless. "Staff Sergeant General Matthews wants you, immediately." I wiped my hands, smoothed my uniform, and hurried across the compound. The general was a man who rarely wasted time or emotion. When he called, you didn't ask why. You just went. He stood behind his desk when I entered, jaw-tight eyes avoiding mine. That alone was frightening. Sit, he ordered. I did. He slid an envelope toward me, thick official sealed with diplomatic markings. These are your travel orders. For what operation, sir? His throat tightened. Staff Sergeant, I'm not authorized to give you details. I frowned. Sir, with respect, why me? He looked at me then, and what I saw in his eyes wasn't command. It was pity. Because the request came from above my pay grade, far above. My stomach nodded. Sir, am I in danger? No, then softer at least. I hope not. I stared at the envelope. No briefing, no escort, no reason. Your flight leaves in 3 hours, he said, pack light. General? That's an order, Marine. The finality in his voice chilled me. Something wasn't right. Even he felt it. 3 hours later, I boarded a military transport jet with nothing but a small pack and the sinking feeling that the ground beneath my life was shifting. When the plane landed at Heathrow, I expected British military personnel or embassy staff. Instead, a man in a tailored royal livery stood at the gate holding a sign. My full name, first, middle, last, all spelled correctly. No one knew my middle name? No one. He bowed slightly. Ma'am, please come with me. I followed him into the rain, heart pounding like a drum. The drive was long, winding, eerily silent, far from London, far from anything. Then the trees thickened, the road narrowed, the forest swallowed us whole. Until finally an enormous stone estate rose from the mist lit by lanterns and moonlight. Grand, ancient, hidden. The driver stepped out and opened my door. Ma'am, he whispered, he's been waiting a very long time. And when the door opened, when the man with red eyes looked at me as if he recognized my soul, when he whispered the words that shattered the life I thought I knew. Hurry, the king is waiting for you. The words echoed in my head like they were bouncing off the inside of my skull. Hurry, the king is waiting for you. I'd been in firefights. I'd done casualty evacuations in the middle of chaos. I'd watched rockets arc across a night sky and prayed they landed short. None of that rattled me the way that one sentence did. The king is waiting for you. For me, a kid who grew up on secondhand sneakers and donated backpacks in a Virginia orphanage. A Marine staff sergeant whose biggest VIP up to this point had been a visiting senator shaking hands for a photo op. I stood there on the stone steps, rain misting against my face, and for a second I almost turned around. I almost told the driver to take me back to the airport, to the base, to anything that made sense. But Marines don't run, and orders were orders. I stepped inside. The air was warmer, scented with old wood beeswax polish, and something faintly floral. The hall was lined with paintings and tapestries that looked like they belonged in a museum. A grandfather clock ticked softly somewhere like a heartbeat. The man who'd opened the door, mid-50s, thinning gray hair suit, too formal to be just a servant, closed it carefully behind us. He swallowed, then looked at me as if he didn't trust his own voice. You must be exhausted, he said. You came straight from America. Yes, sir, I answered automatically. From base. Base, he repeated like the word hurt, of course. He started walking down the corridor and I followed. My boots felt too loud, too rough, like they didn't belong on this polished floor. I kept my voice low. Sir, with respect, why am I here? He hesitated. You could see something breaking inside him, like he wanted to tell me everything and nothing at the same time. Then he shook his head. His Majesty will explain, he said. It isn't my place. I'd heard that phrase before, different words, same meaning. It isn't my place, above my pay grade, orders from higher. The estate melted around me as I walked hallway after hallway, room after room. I saw glints of silver frames, old photographs in black and white uniforms I didn't recognize. Some faces looked oddly familiar. Not because I knew them, but because the structure of their jaws, their cheekbones, their eyes reminded me of someone I could never quite remember. Funny thing about shock, it doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in slices. The first slice had been back on base. General Matthews didn't like to repeat himself. The day he summoned me, he looked older than I'd ever seen him. Not tired from a deployment or frustrated by red tape. No, this was different. This was the look of a man caught in someone else's game. He slid the envelope toward me like it was a live grenade. Staff Sergeant, your orders. I picked it up, turned it over. Diplomatic markings, high-tier clearance. Sir, is this a joint operation, I asked. In a manner of speaking, he said, That's not an answer, sir. He let out a slow breath and sat down, which was shocking enough on its own. I'd only ever seen him stand behind desks in front of formations at ceremonies. Seeing him fold into his chair made him look human, and that scared me more than any briefing. You have served well, he said. No black marks, no complaints, reliable, calm, discreet. Thank you, sir. These are qualities that have been noticed. He cleared his throat. You are being temporarily assigned under special authority to travel to the United Kingdom. You will not be in combat. You are not being punished. You are not being discarded. Discarded, funny word choice. Sir, I don't understand, I said. He rubbed his eyes with his thumb and forefinger. There are times when soldiers are used for reasons that have nothing to do with war, he said quietly. Sometimes, Staff Sergeant, we carry things no one else is allowed to carry. Information, presence, bloodline. That last word hit me right in the chest. Bloodline, sir. He seemed to regret saying it. You'll receive no further briefing from me, he said, all steel again. You are to comply without question. Do you understand? I hesitated a second too long. Sir, do you understand Marine? The bark in his voice snapped my spine straight. Yes, sir. He nodded once. You will leave the base within the hour. Your personal effects will be stored. Take only what you need to travel. You'll be gone, as long as it takes. How will I know when to return, I asked. He looked at me then, and there was real sorrow in his eyes. If it is up to me, Staff Sergeant, you will come home. That's all I can say. I stood saluted and walked out with the envelope in my hand and a hollow feeling in my stomach. The guys in my unit tried to make light of it when they saw my packed bag. Hey, Staff Sergeant, finally getting that European vacation, Corporal Diaz joked. Yeah, I said, first stop the Queen, or King, or whoever. They laughed, but when they realized I wasn't joking, the mood shifted. Marines don't like unknown variables. We prefer clear enemies and clear maps. You good, Sergeant Miller asked quietly later when we were alone. Orders are orders, I said. That's not what I asked. I shrugged, nothing to be good or bad about yet. He studied me a second. If this feels wrong, you watch your six, he said. Chain of command doesn't always mean chain of care. Chain of care, another phrase that stuck. I boarded that flight feeling like a package instead of a person. No mission brief, no objective, just movement. From America to England, from solidity to mist, from the known to the absurd idea that somehow I was needed by a king. The man leading me through the estate stopped at a heavy carved door. You will see him in here, he said. He may need a moment, but he insisted you not be kept waiting long. Who are you? I asked softly. He blinked, surprised by the question. My name is Arthur, he said. I've served this household my entire life. Is this a government matter? I pushed. Military intelligence. Arthur's mouth tightened. This is a family matter, Staff Sergeant. Those words made my skin prickle. Family matter. I almost laughed. My entire life had been defined by the absence of family. Every form I filled out, every next of kin blank I left empty, it all said the same thing. This one belongs to no one. I looked at the carved door, at Arthur's lined face, at the weight of centuries pressing in from the walls. This order doesn't make sense, I murmured more to myself than to him. He gave me a look that was almost kind. Not yet, he said, but it will. I thought of General Matthews unable to meet my eyes, of the clerk who couldn't open my records, of the stamped word restricted on a file that should have just shown a dead mother and father, of my father's half-hidden face in that old photograph, his coat not quite American, his posture more protective than proud. Arthur, I said quietly, what does the king want with a Marine orphan from Virginia? Arthur's voice dropped to a whisper. My dear, if things had gone differently, you would not have been an orphan, and you would not have been from anywhere near Virginia. The floor seemed to tilt. Before I could ask anything else, he lifted his hand and knocked gently on the door. Your Majesty, he called, voice trembling just a little, she's here. My heart thudded once hard. Whatever this was, whatever order had uprooted me from my base and my country and my simple, defined life as a Marine, I knew one thing. Once I stepped through that door, nothing would make sense the way it used to ever again. Arthur opened it, and I walked into the room where a king was waiting, with answers I wasn't sure I wanted. The room was quiet in a way that felt intentional, like silence had been cultivated here year after year until even the air learned to sit still. A fire burned low in the stone hearth. Heavy drapes softened the afternoon light. And behind an old oak desk sat the man I had been summoned across an ocean to meet. The king. He looked older than the news photographs, older, softer, more human. His posture carried the weight of decades, yet his eyes were sharp, searching, almost pleading. He stood slowly when I entered, as if rising cost him something. Arthur bowed and closed the door behind me. I was suddenly alone with a man whose face was on coins. Staff Sergeant the King said, his voice steady but worn around the edges. "Thank you for coming." My training kicked in, spine straight, heels together, chin level. "Your Majesty?" He gave me a small, sad smile. "Please, there's no need for formality between us. Not today." Between us, my stomach tightened. Nothing about this made sense. He motioned toward a chair. "Sit, please." I sat slowly, unsure whether to brace for danger or revelation. The king lowered himself across from me, fingers trembling slightly as he rested them on the desk. "You must have questions," he said. "I do, sir," I answered, "starting with why I'm here." A shadow crossed his face. "You're here because you were meant to be found." The back of my neck prickled. Found. Yes. He exhaled long and weary, and because I've waited far too long. I studied him. His wrinkled hands, the grief in his expression, the urgency he was barely holding together. The room smelled faintly of old books and smoke, the scent of a place where confessions had waited too long. "With respect, Your Majesty," I said carefully, "I think there's been a mistake. I'm just a Marine from Virginia. I don't have ties to any of this." He held up a hand not to silence me but to stop himself from breaking down. "You do, Staff Sergeant. More than you know." Before I could respond, he reached into a drawer and pulled out an old leather box, cracked, faded, the color of dried earth. He set it on the desk and slid it toward me. My breath caught. Something about it felt familiar. "Open it," he said. I hesitated, then lifted the lid. Inside lay a small collection of items, a gold locket, a folded photograph, a ring with an emblem I didn't recognize, and a delicate silver hairpin shaped like a laurel. I felt my hands go cold. "These belong to your mother," the king said softly. My heart hammered. "My mother?" "Yes?" "But my mother died when I was 6, I said. "There were no belongings recovered, no—" "There were," he interrupted gently. "But you were never told." I stared at him, searching his face for any hint of deception. Instead, I found sorrow, heavy, bone-deep sorrow. "Your Majesty, how would you know anything about my mother?" He hesitated, then stood and walked toward the fireplace. He placed a hand on the mantel, steadying himself. "Because she was my daughter." The words hit me like a blow. My mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Daughter. My mother, his daughter." "That's not possible," I whispered. "My mother was American." "No," he said, turning to look at me. "She wasn't." My pulse roared in my ears. He gestured to the photograph inside the box. Hands trembling, I unfolded it. A young woman, mid-20s, standing in sunlight. Hair pulled back, posture proud. Eyes bright with intelligence and kindness. She looked strikingly familiar, like someone I'd seen in mirrors without realizing it. "That photo was taken here," he said quietly, "on these grounds." I forced my voice steady. "This is some kind of mistake." "My mother's name was—" He said the name before I could. Every letter, pronounced perfectly. My body went still. That name, he said, was one she used in America, for protection. I felt like I was sinking. Protection from what? From those who wanted to erase her from royal lineage, he said. From those who believed her existence was an inconvenience, a vulnerability. My throat tightened. Erase, like hide her. Like bury her, he said, voice breaking, and you along with her. I stared at him, unable to process the enormity of it. The king lowered his eyes. She fled here with a man she loved deeply, a man sworn to protect her, your father. He looked at me slowly. An American operative, loyal, brave, the best man I ever met. My chest felt too tight. My father worked for you. He worked to protect her from those in my world, the king said, including my advisors, including people I trusted. I felt the room spin. Your parents left England, he continued, and made a life in America. I thought distance would keep them safe. I believed I had bought them peace. He swallowed hard. I was wrong. I felt the edges of my vision blur. The photo in my hand seemed to vibrate. Your Majesty, I whispered, my parents died in a car accident. That's what the police said. His eyes filled with grief so raw it startled me. There was no accident. I felt my body go rigid. No, he repeated, voice cracking. There was no accident. The fire snapped loudly as if protesting. I shook my head slowly. Then what happened to them? The king lowered himself into a chair beside me. He looked smaller now, diminished by the truth he'd been carrying. They were targeted, he said quietly, by a joint faction of intelligence operatives, British and American, who feared what their child might represent. My heart stopped. Child? I whispered. He nodded. You. The word landed with a thud. I forced myself to breathe, so I became an orphan because they were trying to protect you, he said, and because I failed to protect them. My vision burned. I searched for you, he continued. I begged, threatened, and even disobeyed my own advisors. But every file, every adoption record, every trace of your existence was locked behind walls even I couldn't break. I swallowed hard, my voice barely audible. Why find me now? He met my gaze, and for a moment he wasn't a king at all. He was a father grieving another daughter. Because the last barrier finally fell, he whispered. Because the people who hid you are no longer in power. Because your father may still be alive. The air rushed out of my lungs. Alive. My hands trembled around the photograph as the weight of everything crashed over me. My childhood, my restricted records, the file no one could open, the general's haunted eyes, the order that came from above his pay grade. And now a king telling me my mother was his daughter. I swallowed hard. What do you want me to do? He stepped closer, his voice thick with emotion. Help me finish what your parents started. Help me find the truth. And help me bring your father home. I didn't know whether to stand, run, scream, or salute. Instead, I just nodded slowly because for the first time in my life, something in my blood stirred, recognizing itself. The king reached out not to command me, but to steady himself. Welcome home, he whispered. And for the first time since I was 6 years old, I didn't feel orphaned. I don't know how long I sat there staring at the photograph of the woman the king claimed was my mother. Long enough for the fire to crackle low. Long enough for my heartbeat to slow from a sprint to a steady hollow thud. Long enough for the truth, if it was truth, to settle over me like a weighted blanket I couldn't push off. The king didn't rush me. He stood by the mantelpiece, one hand braced against the stone as though the memories he was about to reopen might crush him if he wasn't careful. Finally, when I found enough air in my lungs to speak, my voice came out quieter than I expected. Sir, if she was your daughter, why did no one know about her? His eyes softened with a sadness that looked older than his crown. They weren't meant to, he murmured. Not then, not ever. He moved slowly back to his chair and lowered himself onto it, not with the dignity of a monarch, but with the exhaustion of a man who had carried too many regrets for too many years. His fingers trembled as he opened a second drawer and pulled out a thin stack of old letters bound with a faded blue ribbon. These are hers, he said, the ones she wrote to me after she left England. He slid them toward me. I hesitated. Why didn't she stay? The king shut his eyes as if the answer had a flavor he couldn't bear to taste. Because my world, our world, would have destroyed her. I didn't breathe. She never wanted a title, he continued. Never wanted the life forced upon her. She was brilliant, stubborn, compassionate, and watched too closely by advisors who feared any shift in royal bloodlines. When she met your father, she found the courage to leave. I swallowed hard and looked down at the letters. Elegant handwriting. Ink faded by time, a little smudge here and there where someone's thumb had rubbed too gently, too lovingly. She fell in love with an American officer assigned to protect her, the king said softly. Your father, the one whose face is half turned in your photograph. My heart tightened. You knew my father, I whispered. I did, he said. He was a good man, a loyal man, and he loved her fiercely. The firelight flickered across the walls. For a moment I forgot where I was, forgot the estate, forgot the uniform I wore, forgot the weight of the Marine Corps on my shoulders. I was just a little girl again staring at a photo no one would explain. What happened to them, I asked. Why did I grow up in an orphanage? The king looked down at his hands. Because they were being hunted. I felt a cold ripple race through me. Hunted by who? A quiet alliance of people who believed their marriage and their child posed a threat to both governments. On my side, there were those who feared scandal. On your side, there were those who feared leverage. Leverage, my voice cracked slightly. Royal blood, he said, mixed with American intelligence. To some it was an unacceptable vulnerability, a bargaining chip no one wanted to exist. I shook my head. So they were chased across countries. Yes. The single word felt like a blade clean and merciless. They ran, he said softly. From London to the countryside, from the countryside to safe houses in Scotland, then eventually on forged documents across the ocean to America. And you didn't send anyone to help them, I demanded. His face folded into itself. I tried, he said, voice breaking. But every step I took was watched. Every favor I asked raised suspicion. Every path I opened was quietly closed by those who claimed to serve the crown. He leaned forward, gripping the arms of his chair. When your mother realized the danger growing around you, she begged me not to intervene anymore, not through official channels. She said it made the hunters more desperate, that you were safer if nothing connected you to England. My fingers tightened around the photograph. But why didn't they tell me anything I asked? Why pretend we were just ordinary? Because they wanted you to have a life, he whispered. A normal life, a safe life. They planned to tell you everything when the threat passed. His voice cracked. But the threat never passed. A silence spread between us, heavy as iron. Your Majesty, I said I was told they died in a car accident. He looked at me with a pain so raw I felt it in my chest. There was no accident, there was an operation. My stomach nodded. An assassination. He shook his head slowly. Not exactly. Their car was forced off a remote road, but they survived the crash. They were separated. Your mother was injured badly. She died in hiding days later. I felt like the floor dropped away. And my father, I forced out. His hands clenched, taken, by those who wanted him silenced. So I swallowed hard. Is he dead? A strange look crossed the king's face, fear mixed with hope. We don't know, he said. But there are signs he may be alive. A man matching his description appeared in restricted medical records years ago. Someone erased the file before we could trace him. My pulse hammered. I've spent years trying to find him, the king admitted. Years trying to find you. But the people who orchestrated all this were very good at hiding what they stole. Why now, I asked. Why summon me now after all this time? He took a shaky breath. Because the last of the men who hid you has lost his position, and because intelligence records once sealed are now being audited, old walls are crumbling, files are opening. He paused, voice trembling, and your name appeared. I stared into the fire, struggling to absorb everything. My entire life a lie. My parents hunted, my childhood engineered by strangers. My father possibly alive. The king studied me with the quiet fear of a man who had already lost too much. I didn't bring you here for obligation, he said softly. Not for politics. I brought you because you deserve the truth, and because your parents would want you to know who you are. My throat tightened. And who is that? He stood slowly like the weight of the crown dragged against his bones. You are their daughter, he said. A child of courage and sacrifice. A Marine. And one day, perhaps, the bridge between two nations who tried to tear your family apart. I didn't speak, couldn't. He stepped closer, his eyes glassy. I failed my daughter, he whispered. I failed your mother. Let me do right by you. Let me help you find your father. The fireplace crackled softly. Outside, wind rattled the ancient windows. And in that quiet room with a king's grief pressed up against my own, I felt something inside me shift. Not acceptance, not forgiveness. Resolve. Your Majesty, I said, standing tall, tell me where to start. And with a slow, trembling nod, he opened the next drawer, one full of classified files, sealed documents, and the first breadcrumbs that would change everything I thought I knew. The king didn't hand me a title, he handed me 3 folders. No matter what people say in public, he murmured, "This is where the real story lives." He spread them on the desk between us. No ceremony, just worn cardboard and the soft rasp of paper. "Begin there," he said, tapping the first. The tab read "Subject Child, Unsanctioned Heir." A chill went through me. "That's me." He nodded. Inside were reports from both governments. I recognized the American formatting immediately: Joint Task Force headers, classification stamps, the kind of paperwork I'd filed without thinking. Date of birth correct. Place of birth not the small Virginia hospital I'd been told, but a private clinic outside London. Status relocated. Beneath in clean, heartless language. Relocation. Cover story. Parental fatality. Single vehicle accident. Receiving facility. State Child Home, Virginia, USA. Risk factors. Genetic lineage. Potential political leverage. My throat tightened. "So the tragic accident that made me an orphan," I said slowly, "was a story written to tidy their consciences," the king finished. Farther down another line. Emotional response within expected range. Narrative stable. Recommend child remains unaware of heritage. They wrote about my grief like it was a lab experiment, I muttered. The king's jaw clenched. They prefer to measure pain instead of own it. Near the back was a denial notice, an attempt years ago to access my file blocked as unauthorized. In the margin, in different handwriting, someone had added, "Request from Royal House Representative. Denied per standing order." I looked up. "You tried to reach me." "Many times," he said. Each time the door closed just before my hand touched it. I closed the folder, my life reduced to a risk assessment. "And this one?" I asked, touching the second. "That concerns your father." I opened it carefully. He stared back at me from several photographs, sometimes in uniform, sometimes in a plain suit, always with that same focused gaze. The file listed him as a joint American-British intelligence operative. Primary assignment: protection detail, royal family member, evaluation: highly competent, discreet, trusted. Then a later entry. Subject: compromised by emotional involvement with protectee. Risk loss of objectivity. Recommend transfer control measures. "That's their phrase for marrying my mother," I said. "Yes," the king replied quietly. "They reduce love to compromise when it complicates their plans." The final page was shorter. Intervention executed on rural roadway. Target separated. Female subject critical removed to non-disclosed location. Male subject secured. Child unconfirmed at scene. And then stamped hard enough to dent the paper. Asset transferred to secure medical holding. Further inquiry not advised. I ran my thumb over that sentence until the paper went soft. Medical holding, I repeated. A place you send someone when you want them breathing but gone. "There are traces," the king said. "A patient with no history matching his description appears in 2 old audits. The records were wiped, but not perfectly. Whoever cleaned them was aging, careless, or both." "So he might still be alive," I said. "It is possible," he answered, "and if he isn't, someone knows exactly when that changed." I set my father's file beside mine and tapped the 3rd folder, and this one is about who did it. Yes. Inside was a list of names: officials, officers, consultants. Some were crossed out. Years and causes of death were noted in the margins. One name was circled. Harrison Wexler, Strategic Security Advisory Private. On paper, the king said he ran a consultancy that helped governments manage risk. In practice, he coordinated the off-the-books decisions. He bridged 2 systems that wanted you and your parents to disappear without leaving fingerprints. A memo bearing Wexler's name made my stomach twist. Child component relocated. Residual risk acceptable if monitored. Recommend future enlistment in military structure for indirect oversight. Heritage disclosure not advised. I read it twice, the words blurring at the edges. "They suggested the military as a leash," I said. Someone listened. Whether from self-interest or a warped sense of protection, I cannot say, the king replied. But yes, someone followed that advice. I thought of the retired colonel who'd visited the orphanage, the way his eyes had lingered when I mentioned the Marines. I thought of my unusually smooth processing the recruiter who'd said, "This will give you a safe track, kid," like he'd already seen the file I wasn't allowed to see. For years, I said slowly, I thought the Corps was the first place that truly wanted me. Now I wonder if it was just the first place that catalogued me. Anger didn't explode. It settled dense and steady like a weight in my chest. The flag I served still mattered. The men and women beside me still mattered. But the machine behind them, the one that had quietly rearranged my life for convenience, looked different now. I closed the third folder. So I said, that's the shape of it. Men in quiet rooms decided my parents were too messy to exist. They tore us apart, lied about their deaths, hid my father, parked me in an orphanage, then watched from a distance, while telling themselves it was for the greater good. That is an accurate, if painful, summary, the king said. What do you want from me? I asked, in plain language. He didn't look away. I want nothing you do not freely give. I can pursue this alone now that I have grounds to demand records. You have already been used by more systems than any one person deserves. I will not add mine to the list. It was strange hearing that from a monarch. For most of my life, other people had made choices for me and called it care. Now the one man who could command nations was telling me I had a say. I looked down at the files, my childhood, my parents, the architect of it all, and felt something settle into place. I don't want revenge just to hurt someone, I said. That doesn't bring anybody back. No, he agreed. But I do want the truth, I continued. I want this on paper where it belongs. I want to stand in the same room with the man who wrote those recommendations and see if he still thinks the child component was an acceptable risk. A faint, grim satisfaction flickered in the king's eyes. Then you wish to be involved, he said. I'm a Marine, I replied. I don't walk away just because the target wears a suit instead of a uniform, and this time the file on the table is mine. He exhaled some long-held breath, finally leaving him. Then we begin with the piece still moving on the board. Harrison Wexler. He maintains interests on both sides of the Atlantic, but lately he spends much of his time in one particular city. Where I asked. The king opened a thin sleeve and slid out a glossy photo. A man in an expensive suit was stepping from a black car, expression calm and practiced. On his lapel, a visitor's badge. In the blurred background, unmistakable even through the lens, rose the dome of the United States Capitol. Washington, the king said, very close to your other home. I studied Wexler's face. He looked utterly at ease. A man who believed his past would stay buried because it always had. He didn't know not yet that one of the ghosts he'd filed away under acceptable risk had grown up, put on a uniform, and just read every line he thought she'd never see. I slid the photo back into the folder and closed it. All right, I said quietly, let's go introduce ourselves. The next morning began before sunrise. I barely slept. My mind kept replaying words from the files, the faces in the photographs, the final page stamped with my father's erasure. Every hour or so I woke with a knot in my chest, unsure whether I was grieving or preparing for a battle I couldn't name. At 0600, Arthur knocked softly and guided me to a small breakfast room overlooking the misty woods. The king was already there, seated beside a stack of folders and a steaming pot of tea. His eyes looked tired, but a live purpose had a way of waking old bones. Good morning, Staff Sergeant, he said. Morning, sir. He gestured to the chair across from him. I sat, the silverware in front of me gleaming like it belonged in a museum. The king didn't bother with pleasantries today. The air between us was too full. I didn't sleep much, he admitted quietly, pouring tea with unsteady hands. I kept thinking about everything we opened yesterday, everything I closed my eyes to for far too long. I studied him. Behind the crown, behind the weight of his station, was just a man who'd lost a daughter and perhaps a son-in-law because power makes cowards in unexpected places. We're going to find him, I said. I didn't realize until the words left me that I meant them. Dead or alive, we'll know. He nodded slowly. You have your mother's resolve. And my father's stubbornness, I said. That helps too. A faint smile touched his lips, small but real. We spent the next hour going through travel routes, contacts, and the fragments of information the king's discreet allies had uncovered since the first audit files were leaked. A name came up repeatedly: St. Alderney Convalescence Unit, a private medical facility once used for sensitive British assets, suffering trauma, or requiring long-term off-the-record care. Many patients had no legal names, the king explained, just designation numbers. It was designed for secrecy, and for hiding those the government preferred to forget. "And you think my father was taken there?" I asked. "Possibly," he said. "The timeline fits. More importantly, someone erased those records recently, someone who feared they might lead back to you." My pulse quickened. "Then that's where we go." He looked at me with a complicated expression, pride, fear, and a quiet ache that said he wished he could shield me even now. "I will send my own physician ahead of us," he said. "He has authority within their network. His presence will raise no suspicion." "And me?" I asked. "You will be my visiting relative," he said. "They will not question the king's private affairs." I snorted. That's one way to put it. He smiled again, only slightly. "Every royal family has its mysteries. Today we lean on that reputation." The King Arthur, 2 discreet security officers, and I traveled in unmarked vehicles, no motorcade, no fanfare. The drive through the countryside was long and winding, flanked by rolling hills, fog-covered fields, and small stone cottages that looked older than the Constitution itself. The medical facility was tucked behind a gated estate surrounded by yew hedges and old brick walls. It resembled a large manor converted for clinical use. No signs, no logos, just a brass plate at the side door that read "Private Entry." A tall, silver-haired doctor met us inside. He bowed respectfully to the king and offered me a gentle nod. "Your Majesty." "Staff Sergeant," he said softly. "I understand we are looking for someone who might match certain descriptions." The king spoke first. "We require access to long-term patient records, restricted ward." The doctor didn't flinch, just lowered his voice. "Of course." He guided us down hushed corridors, smelling faintly of antiseptic and lavender. Patients sat quietly in sunlit rooms, some reading newspapers, others staring blankly out windows that framed the gardens beyond. "So many forgotten lives," I murmured. The doctor gave me a sad look. "They are not forgotten, just hidden." We entered a staff-only wing guarded by 2 nurses who stepped aside immediately upon seeing the king. The doctor led us to a room filled with old metal filing cabinets and digitization terminals. He gestured to a set of non-indexed drawers. "This is where files go when names are removed by intelligence directive. If your father passed through here, his number will be here." My hands trembled before I steadied them and opened the first drawer. Rows and rows of beige folders, each marked with only a code. I started scanning. One code matched the timeline, another matched the region. Another had a notation found unconscious. American accent. Trauma-induced confusion. My heart kicked hard. "Doctor," I whispered, "this one." He took the file, scanning quickly, his eyebrows pinched together. "Admitted 17 years ago. Male. Approximate age late 30s. Multiple fractures from a vehicle incident. Memory instability likely due to blunt force and prolonged stress." "Is he alive?" I asked, voice barely a breath. The doctor swallowed. "Transferred to Ward D 12 years ago. Long-term care." "Ward D, the one for patients who had no one to claim them." My legs felt unsteady. "Is he still here?" I whispered. He nodded. "Yes." My breath stopped completely. Arthur squeezed the king's arm, steadying him. "Take us to him," the king said hoarsely. Ward D was quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet where life continues only because it doesn't know how to stop. The doctor led us to a private room near the end of the corridor. My palms were sweating, my mouth was dry. My heartbeat sounded like distant artillery. He knocked softly. "Mr. Gray," he called gently, "you have visitors." "Gray," I whispered, "is that?" "A placeholder name," the doctor said. "He chose it, said he didn't remember his own." Chosen name, because someone took his real one. The door opened. The room was small, a single window, a book on the bedside table, a cup of tea half sipped, and in the armchair facing the light sat a man with graying hair, a weathered face, and eyes that seemed lost in a horizon only he could see. He looked older, thinner, but the line of his jaw, the shape of his hands. My heart knew before my mind caught up. "Dad," I breathed. The man turned slowly, confused at first. Then his eyes, still sharp beneath years of fog, focused on me. Something in them flickered. Recognition, hope, pain. He stood shakily, gripping the chair for balance. "You?" he whispered. I know you." Tears blurred my vision. "It's me," I said softly. "It's your daughter." He reached out, fingers trembling. When his hand touched mine, he inhaled sharply, like something lost was finally found. "I looked for you," he choked out. "I tried. They took everything. But I held on. I held on because I had a little girl. And she—" His voice broke. The king stepped forward, tears shining in his eyes. "My friend," he whispered, "we've come to take you home." My father looked between us, at me, at the king, at the doctor, and then collapsed into my arms, sobbing in a way that shattered whatever was left of the old story I'd been told. We held him, me the king, the last two pieces of a life he'd once fought to protect. And for the first time in decades, the man they tried to erase was no longer invisible. He was found. And I, the child they tried to bury in new identities and false tragedies, was no longer an orphan. I was a daughter again. My father didn't let go of my hand for a long time. His grip wasn't strong, but it was desperate, like he feared I might vanish if he blinked. I kept my other hand behind his back, steadying him as the years of confinement and silence shook through him in quiet, broken waves. The king sat beside us, aging 10 years in emotion, but somehow standing taller in spirit. He didn't speak at first. He simply watched us, father and daughter, rebuilding a bridge someone else had burned. His eyes shone with a sorrow I finally understood. He had lost a daughter once. Now he was watching her come back to life through me. When my father's breathing steadied, he sat back and wiped his face with trembling fingers. "You grew up," he whispered, staring at me like he was memorizing every line of my face. You became a Marine." I managed a small smile. "Someone taught me to fight for the people I love." He swallowed hard. "Your mother would be so proud." The king bowed his head at her name, grief flickering across his features like a shadow in candlelight. He spoke gently. "My daughter loved you both more than the world ever allowed her to show." My father closed his eyes for a long moment. She died believing they'd get to our child next. She asked me to run, said she'd find us again later. But they caught her." I tightened my grip. "It's okay, you're safe now." His voice cracked. "They told me you died. They made me believe it, to break me." I felt something deep in me twist, anger, sorrow, all of it mixing into a single unfamiliar ache. I'd never wished pain on anyone, but at that moment, the people who orchestrated this deserved every consequence fate could manufacture. The king placed a gentle hand on my father's arm. "No more hiding, no more lies. You have my word." My father looked up at him, really looked, and for a second I saw the bond the files had hinted at. Two men who once trusted each other enough to build a plan that could have bridged their worlds. Two men who'd been shattered by the same loss. "You tried to find me," my father whispered. "I never stopped," the king said. "Even when they told me to let go. Even when they threatened my position. Even when they said you, and she, would only bring ruin." My father nodded weakly, then leaned back. Years of sedation and isolation had softened his body, but not his core. His spirit was still there, buried under pain, but alive. And now he wasn't alone. We spent hours with him, listening to the fragmented memories that resurfaced once he saw me. Some came in clear pieces, others were tangled threads he struggled to unravel. But the picture was becoming whole. He remembered the night everything went wrong. He remembered being pulled from the wreck. He remembered my mother writhing in pain, begging him to run. He remembered being held in an unmarked room by men who spoke in clipped accents, American and British both. And then, a blur. Darkness. Years measured by routines instead of seasons. He'd survived because someone had decided he was still useful, but they'd left him mentally fractured long enough for the truth to fade into static. Until now. The king straightened after a while, resolve tightening his features. "You will not stay here another night," he said firmly. "Arthur will make arrangements. You'll have care, protection, and security in my home if need be." My father blinked at him. "But they'll come looking." "No," I said quietly. "They won't. They can't. The last layers are gone. The people who buried our family don't hold power anymore." He studied me, a flicker of pride rising through the pain. "You sound like her," he whispered. "Your mother." She always spoke like someone who knew the cost of truth but chased it anyway. I swallowed the lump in my throat. An hour later, we escorted my father slowly, carefully to the vehicles. The doctor handed over his few belongings, mostly books and an old sweater. He looked relieved to see the king personally taking responsibility. I always suspected he wasn't simply a number, the doctor confessed quietly as the king stepped outside. But questioning intelligence directives is above my station. "You helped keep him alive," I said. "That's worth more than you realize." He nodded, humbled, and stepped back as we guided my father into the back seat. Arthur drove. The king rode beside me. My father held my hand like a man relearning what hope felt like. When we reached the estate, the staff quietly prepared a private suite for him. Nothing regal, nothing ostentatious. Just a warm room with a fireplace, soft bedding, and wide windows overlooking the gardens. The king insisted on staying until my father fell asleep. "He will need time," he said softly as we stepped out. "But he is stronger than they believed." "So am I," replied. The king smiled. "Yes, I can see that." Over the next days, truth filled the estate like a long-delayed sunrise. Between meetings with legal advisors, intelligence auditors, and trusted royal aides, the king and I pieced together the full timeline: my parents' escape, the threats, the betrayal from within both governments, the orders that erased us. But truth alone wasn't enough. Justice mattered too. The king moved with a quiet fury I'd never expected from an aging monarch. He leveraged influence not for revenge but for correction. Files were unsealed, names were exposed. The systems that had swallowed families whole began to choke on their own secrets. As for Harrison Wexler, the architect of the operation time had done what justice couldn't. He was dead. But not before keeping a careful ledger of his decisions. That ledger, now public, became an indictment against the very machinery that had supported him. The world didn't need a scandal, it needed the truth, and we gave it that. My father grew stronger with each passing week. Some memories returned like old friends, others remained lost in fog. But he remembered me, and that was enough. He spent time in the gardens warming his face in the sun he'd forgotten existed. Sometimes the king joined him, walking side by side in silence that spoke volumes about old wounds and unexpected healing. And one bright morning, as I walked them both through the grounds, my father touched my arm. "I thought you were gone forever," he said, "but you found me." I shook my head gently. We found each other. He smiled, a soft, fragile smile that felt like an entire childhood restored in a single heartbeat. When it was time to return to the U.S., the king walked me to the car himself. "You are always welcome here," he said, placing a small silver pin in my palm, his daughter's laurel hairpin, the one from the box. "Take this," he whispered, "not as royalty, as family." Emotion rose in my throat. "Thank you, grandfather." He closed his eyes at the word. "Take care of your father, and take care of yourself." "I will." Back on base weeks later, I felt different. Not royal, not special, just whole. A Marine with scars and a history she finally understood. My father lived nearby in a secure home under both U.S. and British protection. Every night I visited him after duty. Every night he asked me the same thing. "Can we take a walk tomorrow?" And every night my answer was yes. The truth hadn't brought revenge. It brought clarity, it brought healing, and it brought us back together. What they tried to erase, endured. What they tried to bury, rose. And what they tried to break became stronger. If you're listening to this, I hope you take something with you. Family isn't always the one you're born into. Sometimes it's the one you fight for, the one that survives the truth, the one that chooses you again and again. If this story meant something to you, share it. If it moved you, tell someone. And if you'd like to walk with me again, subscribe and stay in this little corner of honor and healing. 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 and healing, 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 and healing,